A corrupt judge traps a black man until one woman's fight for justice changes everything. Adam Williams had always done everything right. He worked hard in college, studied late into the night, and helped his mother whenever he could. He had dreams, big ones. He wanted to be an engineer, someone who built things and made life better. People saw him as a good young man, a role model. His professors spoke highly of him, his classmates respected him, and his little brother, Sam, looked up to him like a hero. But none of that mattered the night he was arrested. It happened so fast, like a bad dream he couldn't wake up from. One moment, he was stepping out of a small cafe, his mind still hot from an argument with Ethan Monroe, the spoiled son of a rich businessman. The next, flashing red and blue lights painted the street, and a police car screeched to a stop in front of him. Hands where I can see them. Before Adam could even react, rough hands grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. Cold metal cuffs snapped around his wrists, biting into his skin. "You're under arrest for assault," an officer said, his voice firm and emotionless. "What? No, I didn't touch him." Adam's heart pounded in his chest. He struggled, but the officer tightened his grip, forcing him forward. A few feet away, Ethan stood with a smirk, wiping a bit of blood from his lip. He wasn't hurt badly, just a small cut. But the way he looked at Adam, with that smug, satisfied expression, made Adam feel sick. "I didn't do anything," Adam said again, his voice shaking now. But it didn't matter. The officers shoved him into the back of the car. The door slammed shut, trapping him inside. Through the window, he saw people stopping to watch, whispering. Their faces blurred as the car sped away, sirens wailing into the night. By morning, the whole city knew his name. The news spread fast, faster than the truth. Every channel showed his picture. College student arrested for violent attack. His face stared back at him from the TV screen, his name now tied to a crime he didn't commit. The reporters talked about him like he was some kind of monster, like they already knew he was guilty. They didn't mention how Ethan had been the one pushing him, shoving him, calling him names. They didn't say how Adam had only used words, never his fists. No one cared about his side of the story. At home, his mother collapsed onto the couch, tears running down her face. She had worked so hard to give Adam and his brother a good life, to keep them safe. But now, no matter how much she cried, she couldn't protect him from this. Sam sat frozen, gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He was only 15. He had always seen his brother as strong, unshakable. But now, Adam was sitting in a jail cell, and the world had turned against him. Then came the worst news of all. Judge Greaves was handling Adam's case. His name was known by many, whispered in fear. A man who never spoke of race, but let his rulings speak for him. If you were black and stood in his courtroom, your fate was already sealed. He had spent years sending young black men to prison while letting the rich and powerful walk free. Everyone knew it, but no one could stop it. And now, he was the one deciding Adam's future. Adam's mother tried to find a lawyer, someone who would fight for her son. But most wouldn't even return her calls. Some gave polite excuses. Others didn't bother hiding their fear. The Monroe family had money, influence, connections. No lawyer wanted to stand against them. Then, finally, someone stepped forward. Monica Ellis. She was different. From the moment she walked into that jail, Adam felt it. She had sharp eyes, a steady voice, and a fire inside her that wouldn't be put out. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a fighter. She sat across from him in the small, gray room, looking him straight in the eyes. "I read your case," she said, her voice firm but calm. "They don't have real evidence. Just Ethan Monroe's word." Adam swallowed hard. "Does that matter?" Her jaw tightened. "Not to them, but it matters to me." In court, she saw exactly what she had expected. Judge Greaves barely looked at her when she spoke. The prosecutor smirked as he laid out the so-called facts. There were no cameras in the courtroom, no reporters, but the message was clear. This wasn't a fair trial. This was a show, and the ending had already been written. Adam sat in the defendant's chair, shoulders tense, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. He wasn't a criminal, but the way the courtroom treated him made him feel like one. Every time the judge looked at him, it was with cold disapproval, like Adam had already been found guilty. Monica kept her face calm, but inside, she was boiling. The case was weak. There were no witnesses except Ethan's friends, no video, no proof. Just one rich boy's word against Adams. And yet, she could already see the direction this was going. As she walked out of the courtroom, her heels clicking against the floor, she felt a weight settle on her shoulders. Adam's mother and brother were waiting outside, their faces filled with worry. They didn't need to ask what had happened inside. They could see it in her expression. They didn't ask if Adam would be okay. They asked if there was any chance of justice. Monica had won difficult cases before. She had faced corrupt judges, unfair trials, and a system designed to break young black men. But as she glanced back at the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom, she knew one thing for certain, that the case against Adam Williams was nothing but lies. But lies, when backed by power, could be very dangerous. She had spent hours gathering evidence that proved Adam's innocence. Security footage from a nearby store showing that Adam never touched Ethan. Phone records placing Ethan's friends away from the scene when they claimed to have witnessed the attack, and statement from classmates who knew Adam's character. It was enough to clear him, enough to destroy the prosecution's weak case. But Judge Greaves didn't care. The moment she presented the evidence in court, he barely glanced at it before waving it away. "Irrelevant," he said. "Denied." His voice was flat, almost bored, as if her efforts were nothing more than a nuisance. Monica clenched her jaw, keeping her anger in check. "Your Honor, this video footage directly contradicts the prosecution's claims. The jury will decide what's important, Counselor." His gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Motion denied." Adam sat beside her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his face tense. He had barely spoken since the trial began, his hopes shrinking with every passing day. Monica had warned him that the system was unfair, but now he was seeing it firsthand. The prosecution's case was built on lies, and yet, in this courtroom, those lies were treated as truth. Ethan Monroe's friends, all from wealthy families with ties to city officials, sat in the witness stand and told the same story, a well-rehearsed tale of how Adam had attacked Ethan without warning. They spoke with confidence, smiling easily, knowing that no one would question them. Monica tried to expose their inconsistencies, asking sharp, direct questions that made them stumble over their words. But each time she began to corner them, Judge Greaves stepped in. "Move on, Counselor. Watch your tone. You've made your point." She hadn't, but it didn't matter. She filed motion after motion to introduce real evidence, to challenge the credibility of the witnesses, to push back against the prosecution's baseless claims. Every motion was dismissed. It was as if the trial had already been decided. Adam's mother sat in the courtroom every day, gripping Sam's hand, her eyes dark with exhaustion and pain. She didn't speak much, but Monica could see the silent question in her face. "Is there nothing we can do?" Monica had been a lawyer long enough to know when a case was rigged. The trial moved too fast. The prosecution barely needed to try. The judge refused to allow anything that might help Adam. When Monica objected, Greaves shot her down with a glare. "That's enough, Ms. Ellis." His voice was firm, dismissive. "Your client has had a fair trial." "Fair?" Monica almost laughed at the word. There was nothing fair about this. When the jury came back with a verdict, the air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with unspoken truths. Adam sat still, staring straight ahead, his fists clenched. His mother's breath hitched, her grip on Sam tightening. The foreman stood. "Guilty." A murmur spread through the room. Adam closed his eyes, his face unreadable, as if his body had already known what his mind refused to believe. His mother let out a quiet sob. Sam stiffened beside her, his young face twisting in confusion and anger. Judge Greaves wasted no time. He leaned forward, his expression blank, and announced the sentence. 25 years in state prison. Monica's heart pounded in her chest. 25 years. No parole. No chance. Adam's mother gasped, covering her mouth. Sam shot to his feet, his voice breaking. "You can't do this. He didn't do anything." A bailiff stepped toward the boy, but his mother pulled him close, holding him tightly as he trembled with rage and grief. Adam didn't speak. He didn't fight. He just lowered his head as the officers approached, his face hollow, his body tense but unmoving. Monica rose from her seat, anger burning inside her. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. There is no—" "Sit down, Ms. Ellis." Her fists clenched at her sides. But she sat. The trial was over. The system had one. That night, as Adam was taken away in handcuffs, Monica didn't go home. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in her office, staring at her notes, at the trial transcripts, at the judge's rulings. The more she looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just bias. This wasn't just a bad ruling. This was corruption. Judge Greaves had been doing this for years, blocking evidence, dismissing defense arguments, handing out harsh sentences to black defendants while letting privileged ones go free. The pattern was there, buried in court records, hidden beneath legal jargon. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. If she wanted to save Adam, she needed to expose the man who put him away. She needed to take down Judge Walter Greaves. The night was quiet, but Monica's mind was not. She sat in her office, her hands moved through stacks of documents, her tired eyes scanning every page, every name, every sentence. There had to be something to prove that Judge Walter Greaves was more than just biased. She needed undeniable proof that he was corrupt. She flipped to another case file, her heart sinking as she read the familiar pattern. A black man convicted with no real evidence. The maximum sentence handed down without hesitation. The next file? The same. And the one after that. Monica swallowed hard. These weren't mistakes. They were choices. Deliberate, cruel choices made over and over again. Her fingers traced the names stamped on every document. Judge Walter Greaves. Her stomach twisted. How many lives had he ruined? How many families had suffered because of him? Then, something caught her eye. A name buried deep in an old court report. Daniel Pierce, a former clerk who once worked under Greaves. A man who had tried to speak up before suddenly vanishing from the legal world. Monica leaned forward, pulse quickening. She grabbed her phone and started making calls. Most people hesitated when she mentioned his name. Some hung up immediately, but she didn't stop. She followed every lead until, finally, she found him. They met in a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. The place smelled of fresh bread and bitter coffee, but there was no warmth in the air. Daniel sat hunched over a cup, his fingers wrapped around it like he was trying to steal its heat. His eyes darted around the room, wary, as if someone might be watching. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice low and rough, like a man who had been keeping secrets for too long. Monica leaned in. "I know what Greaves has done. I need you to tell me everything." Daniel let out a slow, shaky breath. His hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, setting it on the table between them. "I kept records," he whispered. "Wire transfers, names, private messages. He's been taking bribes for years. Wealthy families pay him, and he makes sure their sons walk free." Monica stared at the tiny device, feeling the weight of it in the air. This wasn't just evidence. This was the key to taking Greaves down. Daniel looked at her, his eyes dark with worry. "Be careful," he said. "Greaves isn't just powerful. He's dangerous." Meanwhile, Adam was trapped in a different kind of nightmare. Prison was cold, even in the middle of summer. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, rust, and something sour that never quite went away. The walls were gray, lifeless. The food was the same. Every day felt the same. But the worst part wasn't the place. It was the people. Some inmates watched him with cold, empty eyes. Others looked at him like a challenge, waiting for him to slip. The guards barely looked at him at all, unless it was to shove him, to throw his food tray at him like he was nothing. One night, Adam lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. His body ached. His lip was swollen, his ribs sore from the last fight he didn't ask for. He wasn't a fighter, but in here, it didn't matter. He closed his eyes and thought of home. He could almost hear his mother's voice, feel the warmth of her hug. He thought of his brother, Sam, laughing at something stupid. Did they still believe in him? Did they still think he had a chance? Because he wasn't sure anymore. But his mother? She never stopped fighting. Every morning, she stood outside the courthouse, holding a sign with Adam's picture. Her voice was hoarse from shouting for justice, but she didn't stop. Every night, she wrote letters, made calls, begged people to listen. Her body was tired, but her heart refused to break. And now, Monica had something that could make the world listen. She took the evidence straight to Christopher Jones, a journalist known for exposing corruption. He was sharp, relentless, and had taken down powerful men before. But even he looked shaken as he flipped through the files. "This isn't just about one bad judge," he muttered, his jaw tightening. "This is the whole system." Monica nodded. "Then let's burn it down." Within days, Christopher's article was everywhere. The headline slammed into the world like a hammer. Judge Walter Greaves, a system built on injustice. It exposed everything: the rigged trials, the bribes, the lives destroyed. It named names. It showed proof. And the world reacted. Protests exploded outside the courthouse. People held signs, chanted Adam's name, demanded justice. News stations covered it. Social media erupted in outrage. The district attorney's office scrambled to defend Greaves, calling the article one-sided. But no one believed them. The truth was out now, and it couldn't be buried. Monica moved fast. She filed for an appeal, this time with undeniable proof. But Greaves still sat on his throne, still clinging to power. He denied the appeal without cause. No hearing, no explanation, just cold, brutal rejection. Monica clenched her fists. He still thought he could silence them. But he was wrong. She took the fight to the Supreme Court. This time, Greaves wouldn't be the one making the decisions. The world was watching now. And Greaves? He was getting desperate. Witnesses who had spoken out started receiving threats. Daniel Pierce disappeared. No calls, no messages. Monica's office was broken into. Files were missing. Papers were scattered across the floor. Greaves was pulling every string, using every trick, trying to stop what was coming. But it was too late. The walls around Judge Walter Greaves were closing in, but he didn't know it yet. The protests outside the courthouse had not died down. If anything, they had grown louder. The chants of justice for Adam, and end corruption now, echoed through the streets. News crews swarmed, eager for updates. Inside Monica's office, a storm was brewing. She had just received a call, one that could change everything. A whistleblower had come forward with something explosive. It was a secret recording, one that would finally expose the depths of Greaves' corruption. Monica sat frozen as she listened to the scratchy audio file. The voice was unmistakable, cold, arrogant, dripping with greed. "I don't lose cases against them. Their families can cry all they want, but in my courtroom, they don't walk free unless someone makes it worth my time." Monica's stomach twisted in disgust. She listened as Greaves laughed, bragging about the bribes he had taken. He named names. He spoke without fear, as if he believed he was untouchable. She wasted no time. Within hours, the recording was in the hands of federal investigators. The FBI launched a formal investigation, digging into years of Greaves' rulings, bank transactions, and connections to powerful families. The walls weren't just closing in now, they were crumbling. Monica knew this was the moment. She filed for an emergency hearing. This time, Greaves had no control. The Supreme Court stepped in, and within days, Adam's case was back in front of judges who weren't bought and paid for. Adam sat in the courtroom, his wrists still shackled, but hope flickered in his eyes. His mother gripped his hand, whispering prayers under her breath. Monica stood tall, her voice steady as she presented the new evidence. The room was silent as the recording played. Each word was a hammer striking the foundation of Greaves' power. When the final words of the recording echoed through the chamber, the decision came swiftly. Due to overwhelming evidence of judicial misconduct, this court overturns the conviction of Adam Williams. The room erupted. Adam's mother sobbed into her hands. Sam jumped to his feet, shouting his brother's name. Adam closed his eyes, inhaling deeply as if he could finally breathe again. After months of living in a nightmare, he was free. But justice didn't stop there. As the Supreme Court's ruling spread, Greaves realized he was out of time. He tried to run. He packed a suitcase, booked a private jet, and attempted to disappear. But the FBI was waiting. He was arrested at the airport, handcuffed just as he had sentenced countless innocent men to be. Cameras flashed. The world watched as the once powerful judge was led away, his face pale, his arrogance shattered. The charges were brutal: corruption, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations. He had spent years taking freedom away from innocent people. Now his own was gone. Adam stepped out of prison into the arms of his mother. The sun was warm on his skin, but the weight of his time inside still clung to him. The injustice had changed him. He had gone in as a hopeful college student, and come out as a man who had seen the worst of the system. But he refused to let it break him. "I'm going to law school," he told Monica one evening as they sat outside his family's home. "I want to fight for people like me." She smiled, pride shining in her eyes. Then the world just gained one hell of a lawyer. Monica's own career soared. Her fight against Greaves sparked a wave of appeals. Men who had been locked away under his rulings were given new trials. Some walked free. Others had their sentences reduced. The system was far from fixed, but the cracks were finally showing. Change had begun. As for Greaves, he faced the ultimate downfall. After a brutal trial where his crimes were laid bare, he was sentenced to life in prison. He became one of the few judges in history to be held accountable for racial discrimination. He had thought himself untouchable. Now he was just another inmate. The battle wasn't over, but it was a victory. A victory for Adam, for his family, for every innocent life destroyed by men like Greaves. And for Monica, it was only the beginning. She wasn't done fighting. Not yet.